We're going to get started. So welcome tonight to the next in our county leadership series. We're fairly motoring through these. I think Paula will agree we're getting towards them with serious amount of topics already covered. So thanks to everyone who's contributed as we've been going along. As always, if you want to type a question, please use the Q&A function, or you can type in the chat either. I will be taking, I suppose, parts of it. Paula will be taking parts of it. You're going to hear plenty of voices tonight, and there's going to be loads of interaction by yourself as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy it for what, as in some places, would not be an enjoyable conversation in relation to conflict resolution. But we're going to try and give you some more tools for your toolbox, which is what we've been trying to do throughout this whole series to help you out with your county executive. So this is all aimed at the county executive and all officers therein.
Lynn, there's just a few people raising hands, but maybe if they have a question or something, to put it in the chat or the Q&A for them, and I can answer them. Just sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay, fire ahead.
Brilliant. Give Paula plenty of questions throughout this, please. So what we're going to look at tonight is what is conflict, the views of conflict, the types of conflict, and also communication styles, and then managing conflict, because that's extremely important as to how we actually manage it when it does happen. So they're the key things we're going to look at and have plenty of chats as we go through it. So the first thing we're going to do, just in the chat, if you can write a few words that you would associate with the word conflict. So when you think conflict, what words would you associate with it? So if you type them in the chat, and Paula's going to feedback on some of these. We'll just give you a minute there. Don't be shy.
Few coming in there, Lynn, like negotiation.
Very good.
Difference of opinion.
Yeah, it can lead to conflict.
Disagreement per communication.
Yeah, I think communication is probably a word, Paula, we'll hear a few times tonight in this.
Yeah, misunderstanding, unwillingness to see others' point of view.
Very
good.
I
suppose that works both ways. Argument, row, disagreement, not applying proper rules, conflict of personalities, clash of personalities. Yeah, so
perfect. And I suppose a lot of those we might think are quite negative words in a way to do with conflict, and a lot in case there is, but I suppose we're going to show you tonight as well that sometimes there can be positives can come from conflict as well, so that we weigh up both sides and see, okay, well, what can we actually take from a conflict situation? So we're going to look at both sides of that. So for what is conflict, these have pretty much been mentioned. Perception of mutual interference, so that thing of interfering with each other, that it's not helping you to achieve where you need to go or get to where you need to be. A process that begins when goals of one party are frustrated by the other. So that was mentioned in many different guises there in what you wrote in the chat. And the key thing with conflict is it requires interdependence, interaction. So conflict can't happen with one person. Yeah, you can have a conflict of thoughts with yourself, but it's people that are at the center of most conflict. So that's one thing, I suppose, as we go through this, when we are trying to look at conflict resolution, a lot of the times it's people that we have to deal with, and that's where the root of a lot of it is. So we look at that in a little bit more detail as we go through the slides. So for the views of conflict, there's different views of conflict that are known out there. There's the interactionist view, which is where people view conflict as good. So they see it as a good thing, that there's good things can come from it, and we're going to mention some of those good things on the next slide. So that conflict isn't always bad, it's good. For the HR view, and you find this in a lot of companies, etc., they think it's natural. So when you put a bundle of people into a room, to them it's natural that there's going to be conflict of some sort. Not everybody's going to be sitting with the exact same opinion, so conflict is seen as natural. And then for the traditional view, conflict is bad. So in other words, we must avoid conflict in all cases, because it's going to have a detrimental effect. So there are three different views: the good, the natural, and the bad. And from these as well, conflict, regardless of any of these, conflict has to be managed. So if it's not managed, it's going to be difficulty anyway. So before we start, I suppose we want to just know what's your view. So we're just going to throw in a quick poll there. And if you just want to click on if you think it's good, natural, or bad? What's your view? Do you think conflict is good? Is it natural? Is it bad? Paul, I don't know if you can see the results. If you can't, I can pull them from this side anyway.
Yeah, no, I can. Saying you're definitely getting them working early tonight, Lynn.
Work off the tea and biscuits.
Exactly, yeah. They haven't gone to sleep with all the tea and biscuits you gave them anyway, that's for sure. Most people are saying natural, 20, few people saying good, and maybe 2 people saying bad. So most going with the natural.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, everybody has their own views and opinions on what it is, and that's no issue whatsoever. It's just more that at least we can start off tonight with seeing, okay, well, a lot of the people that we have in the room are saying that conflict is natural, but we also have the other viewpoints, and that's good, as you'll see when we go through this, the importance of people thinking differently instead of having everybody that thinks the same in one room. So, managing issues and conflict, and that's what a lot of the slides tonight are going to be about. But in order to be able to manage them, you need to know what your own natural tendency. So you have conflict avoiders, and I suppose it's to see, do you see yourself in the conflict avoider, or do you see yourself as a conflict seeker? So the conflict avoider, they shy away from disagreements, they value harmony and positive relationships. They often try to save people by, or change the subject. So the argument's there, but you know what, if we just change the subject, people will forget what we were actually arguing about. They don't want to hurt people's feelings, and they don't want to disrupt team dynamics. So even maybe somebody really doesn't agree with something, but instead of saying it, they just won't, because they don't want to disrupt the dynamics that's there. On the other side, you have the conflict seekers, and they're eager to engage in disagreements. So you'll find them regularly maybe getting involved in disagreements. They care most about honesty and directness. So if they have an opinion, they'd rather put it out there. So it's not always a bad thing. Instead of meetings outside of meetings, they'll make sure they say it in the meeting. They'll make sure that they're honest and direct about it. They'll strongly advocate for their own personal perspective. They'll lose patience when others aren't being honest or direct. And they don't mind ruffling feathers. So they don't mind ruffling feathers if they think it's going to get them to where they need to go. So I suppose just for yourselves, as we go through this, do you see yourself in the conflict avoider, or do you see yourself in a conflict seeker? And even for yourselves as executive, I'm sure if you're visualizing your executive table, you can probably see a few of both around the table as well. So it's important to know the natural tendencies of people, and we're going to help you identify those a little bit more in relation to the profile of what you are and what sort of a communicator you are and the rest of your executive. So to do that, we have a little task for you. So hopefully in the email that you got from Claire about tonight, you were asked of a pen and paper. So I hope you have that. So we're going to do a little task with yourselves called True Colours. And I know Paula and myself have done this quite a few times. I know my colours keep changing. I don't know about yours, Paula, but we're going to show you how to do this. So what's it about? It's going to be very straightforward. It's only going to take a few minutes, but it's going to allow you to identify your own communication and work style preferences. Why is this important? Because when we talk about conflict, a lot of the times it's because styles have been different. So the conflict has come between people who have different styles or different communication styles, different ways of thinking of things. So we need to recognize and identify that. It allows understanding and appreciation of other styles and preferences. And it thinks about ways and opportunities to adopt your style. So if I knew what somebody's style was, I'd know how to approach them better, for instance. So it's simple and easy to use. So this is what you're going to do. We're going to leave you in silence for a few minutes, which I know can be uncomfortable on a webinar. But you're going to get a sheet of paper. And if you look at the boxes that's on the screen at the minute, you're going to look across. You're going to work in lines straight across. So for instance, in the first one there, the example that was given, if you look at the groups of words, so there's authentic, harmonious, compassionate. The second group is active, opportunistic, spontaneous, versatile, inventive, competent, parental, traditional, responsible. So you have to put the 4 beside which one is most like you, down to 1, which the one is least like you. And you do the same for line 2, the same for line 3, the same for line 4, and the same for line 5. And then we bring it to the next stage where you're going to total these numbers. So we're just going to give you 2 minutes there just to go along the lines. So you should, in every line across, you should have a 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in whatever order that you want. You shouldn't have 2 of any number in a line across. So we're going to let you do that there in silence, although Paula might like you. Paula, you've done this a few times. Have you found it beneficial?
Yeah, definitely have. And I think, as you say, Lynn, I don't know if it's a case that they keep changing, but maybe in the different situation even or scenario that you're in, you find it changes, which I know obviously you'll be explaining to people. And I suppose maybe when you're filling this in, it's like, am I filling it in from a work context, my personal life? And I suppose maybe most people tonight, you should do it from thinking of within your executive, maybe how do you approach it? Because that will give you a fair way. Then I think it'd be easier based on what you're going to talk about next. Then, but it can be, it's good to do, I think, every now and again.
Perfect. So hopefully you all have your pen and paper or use your phone or whatever. So we'll just give you another minute there and then we'll move on to the next one just to show you in relation to totaling everything up. You should just be doing this on a piece of paper yourself. It doesn't, don't be touching the screen or anything else. It's not going to change for you.
Oh, so I shouldn't have wrote up mine on answers on the screen then. No?
Yeah, don't write on the laptop screen. I'm not taking any blame.
I'm sure it's been done at times.
Okay, I'm just going to show you the next one just because you'll still see the words. So when you're done, you'll add up all the numbers in a straight line down. So you'll have a total blue then. Second line will be your total orange. Third line will be your total green. And the fourth line will be your total red. So what you should see is something like this when you're finished. So you should have a total blue, total orange, total green, total red. And then just to identify your color spectrum. So see which one is your highest score. And it's not to say you won't have a bit of all of these, but you should have one that's highest. Although I know the last twice I done this, I had 2 colors come out the exact same. But usually you will have a highest color. So we'll give you another 30 seconds and then we're going to see how you get on. We're definitely making everyone work tonight, Paula.
We surely are. Yeah, I'd say the likes of Ronan McCarthy needs to get his calculator out, Lynn. So just give an extra few minutes for the likes of that.
I didn't say that, Ronan. I didn't say it. Okay, so hopefully you have that done. And if you have, we're just going to share one little final poll. And don't worry, nobody else is going to see the poll that you've done. But on it, it's just going to ask, what color are you? Just so that we can see in the room how many of each color that we actually have. So your predominant color, the one you got the most for. So Paula, you'll be able to see them coming in.
Yeah, I can do. There's a lot of reds in the room. Red and orange at the minute. Green and blue being, oh, blue's taking a turn there. Dominantly red. We've still only 24, so a few people if you haven't. 25 people. Interesting. It is interesting. Wonder where, like, if is it role associated as well, which you'd be interested to see. So red is the predominant one there, Lynn, out of 28 people who have voted, followed by orange, which is very close. It's 10 and a 9. And then you have 6 and 3 with blue and green. Interesting.
Very good. So there's a good mixture of people in the room.
Yeah.
So I suppose this has proven our point as well, in that it's a good thing to have a mixture of people, as we're going to show now in a second. But number one, does it help you see, I suppose, what your color is, but also it lets you see what somebody else in your executive's color is. Sorry, I'm going to go back up there one. What somebody else is. And the reason we put this in here in relation to conflict, if you look at this chart, there's a lot of things in this that would help you in relation to conflict, particularly around, if you look at under tension, so how they'll react under tension. So if I'm a blue and I'm going to speak to somebody who's a red, and I know people don't be going around with these colours in their head, but you get to know slightly what way they are. I'll know straight away under tension how that person will react, or if I'm a blue and I approach a green, how that person's going to react. Also, I'll see that how they need to be supported. But in relation to conflict, look what they get frustrated by. So when you think of your meeting rooms, for instance, look at the different things that frustrates people. So you might think that maybe somebody who's an orange is very looking for conflict, but actually maybe they're just bored because that's what they get frustrated by. For a green, when they feel there's too many rules. For a red, when there's disorder. So this chart really helps you see, okay, particularly in relation to conflict, the under tension, how they'll react, and what frustrates them is really two big things in relation to conflict and how they can be it, but also how they like you to be. So this is very good, that if you're going to approach somebody and maybe you feel that you have something that you want from the conversation, this should help you to know how you should approach that person. So instead of waiting on everybody to change for you, you should know going into it, well, this is the way I need to approach this person because that's how they communicate. So don't always wait on people to change for us. What do we need to do? So, and since we started doing this as part of our training, and Paul, I'll let you in on this too, but I found that kind of if you know roughly the communication style of somebody, I find myself approaching them differently depending on who I'm actually going to chat to. And it's to try and I suppose get away from that conflict situation, but also to open up the communication channels. Paul, I don't know if you found anything on that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree with you, Lynn. And as you said, like, yeah, it's not a case that people are walking around with these colours on their heads. But as you say, you do very much in meetings get to know people and get to know what does frustrate them, what is their, I suppose, what they do when they are under tension or under pressure, like, and how they react to it. And I know for a while when we did it as staff, we actually did have the colours on our computers. Do you remember that? So when somebody walked into your office, they had a reminder straight away of what color you wore was your predominant. So it made you rethink how you approach that staff member even, or if they were busy, then it's like, oh yeah, well, Paula definitely doesn't want to be interrupted now when she's right in the middle of something. I will come back to her. But it definitely, it's a worthwhile exercise. And again, even, I know we've talked on other webinars, Lynn, this could be a nice exercise to do now with your executive in the downtime. Exactly. As a bit of a team building exercise too.
Yeah, and it brings you perfectly on to the next point, Paula, because we're just going to talk about the executive. Because if you can actually create this color chart for your executive, then it'll really help you know, and we're going to see that in the next slide, a sample of it. But if you do this and all of a sudden you have a full table of blue, for instance, is that necessarily a good thing? Because if you're all thinking the same, all communicating the same, and wondering why everybody else outside of you is not thinking that way, well then that could be, so it's to have a mix of people that brings something in it. So how can you ensure that mix of colours in your work groups even? And that point that we mentioned already, don't always expect people to change for you. You might need to change for them. And Paula mentioned this, to perhaps do for your executive. And you can see there a sample one. Now I know that looks ideal scenario with a mixture of all the colours, but it would be very interesting to see, okay, as an executive, what colours are we? Is there a mix of us? Is there a different ways of we communicate? Because sometimes what happens with conflict is, okay, I'm blue and I tend to, now I maybe understand why I always clash with executive member number 3 and executive member number 7, because blues and reds don't work very well together. The same with yellows and greens. It's not to say they don't work together, but they tend to be where the conflict pieces are. So that's the two that kind of goes across. So it's just to see, okay, if you mapped out yours, what would it look like, and is it actually that where the conflict comes from? And bring this a step further, and you're certainly not going to be able to map out your whole county board meeting, but just to make you think, you're the chairperson at the top of the room and you're looking down, and maybe there's a point you're looking to get across, and maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3 particular delegates that you just never seem to be able to get that point through to. Maybe it's because they're the complete opposite communication style to you. So maybe you were green and they were the 3 yellows that was constantly not getting it. So maybe just for one meeting, you try and change your communication style slightly and see then, do you get a different reaction from the people who weren't getting it? So it's just to try and, as I said, you're not going to ask every county, everyone coming to a county board to fill in one of these and you can see all the colours around the place. It's not going to that level. As Paula said, it's just more that you get to know people and you get to see the traits that are associated with them. So it's just to show you a little task. And I know it's something, we've done it with a few chair people before. They've said it's quite helped them because they got to recognize even that there was different styles, and that conflict situation at times tends to be between people of opposing styles, not necessarily the blues with the yellows or the greens with the reds. Not always, now it can still happen, but not as much because their styles complement each other more than the other two. And a lot of it, as we said from the very first slide, comes down to people and the communication style. But we are going to deal with what happens if it does happen. But that's just to help you out in relation to identifying your style. So in the chat again, just to type a few things in there. What are sources or potential sources of conflict within your executive, first of all? So, and maybe there's none, but what are potential ones or sources? And Paul will feed back on some of these also.
Yeah. And obviously, like, it's not, you're not giving anything confidential. It's just more, you can guarantee maybe funding or where money is being spent, it always gives rise to debate, heated debate maybe. Okay, so what's come in is who's responsible for what, timelines for getting things done.
Yeah,
that's
so
interesting.
That there's no crossover of jobs, that responsibility piece. Yeah.
Yeah, failure to communicate, failure to carry out tasks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Difference of opinion, application of the official guide rules.
And there is only one set of rules.
Exactly. Yeah. That obviously causes conflict. People not always pulling their weight. Changes to fixtures, poor leadership, finalizing plans. People go ahead and make decisions without consultation.
Okay, so there are quite a few different things in it, and they're all, I suppose what we're going to give you tonight is tools to help. We're not going to go through all those different scenarios, but we'll give you tools that will help any of those scenarios and how you'd actually started to finish it. And the second little one there, what do you think are sources or potential sources of conflict within your county? So not just in your executive. Now this is in the county, so maybe at a county board meeting, or maybe things that clubs come with conflict to you as a county executive. So in the wider spectrum, what are some sources of conflict?
And Marion just confirmed that about the official guide. She said different interpretation of the rules. So yeah, absolutely. You can see how one person would read it one way and somebody else would read it the other way. And I suppose, again, it comes, people would probably say, well, my experience tells me it's this way. So I can see how that one would go.
100%.
People are saying county versus club. Obviously is a big one, Lynn, as a source of.
Yeah, and I suppose, like I'd say, and I know we're going to go into this later, but I technically wouldn't see that as a source because that's just a statement, county versus club. The source is, okay, in relation to what in county and club is the source of conflict. So that's where it gets into, as you said, some of the nitty gritty of maybe it's a fixture or player or whatever versus the broad spectrum of club versus county.
Yeah. I know that probably the next one answers it, Lynn, about fixtures, gradings, clashes with other associations, decisions being made without discussion, fixtures and gradings, fixtures, perceived lack of perceived lack of consultation with clubs, gradings coming up a lot. Small clubs feel that bigger clubs get a better shout, as usually county players coming from the bigger clubs. Not working within a budget, delighted, thinking only of their own club, not the bigger picture.
Okay, so a lot of that, as you said, it is the club of the county, and I suppose a big word that's jumping out to me in relation to it as well as communication. In a lot of those, in trying to get the full message out there in relation to it. But as I said, we'll try and give you some tools to help you in any of these conflict situations as you go through it. So sources of conflict, and you've mentioned most of these. Those conflicting perceptions, ideas, or beliefs. So even if you think of that thing of a smaller club thinking they're getting less than a bigger club, that's a conflicting perception. It's not to say it's happening, but it's a perception that's happening between it. differences between people, and we've all seen those conflicts between people, and we've looked at the colours now and the potential people who will tend to have that conflict more than others. Conflicting thoughts or needs within an individual, incompatible goals. So you as an executive, for instance, might have something that you feel is the real key target for the year, but as mentioned, maybe the club see something completely different as that priority. So it's how do you match up those priorities? Structural factors, so the structures of what's there in relation to, it could be your fixtures, it could be your committees, anything to do with getting everything moving. Resource scarcity, so if there's something not there to enable whatever it is to happen, it can be a source of conflict. So for instance, maybe clubs wanting X amount more games, but there's not enough referees, there's not enough pitches, etc., etc. So the resources might not be there to do it. And then the big one there at the end, that lack of communication. And that works on both sides. And sometimes there's loads of communications, but a bit like Maria mentioned, it's the interpretation of that communication that's not there either. So how do you find out what's the best way to communicate to try and reduce this conflict actually happening? And that piece, as you mentioned, people feeling maybe that it wasn't discussed with them before it happened. If that's going to happen, well, how do you get communication out there in advance to understand why this has happened or why this decision has been made, so that there's a real clarity in relation to what has happened, and then there's less conflict thereafter. So they're just some of the sources in relation to conflict. The broad headings that are given to these types of conflict are relationship, which is personal feelings over something. So I think one way, but Paula thinks the other. And that's where we have to meet in the middle. Task conflicts, so disagreements over what is to be done. There's process then over how it should actually be done. And then status conflicts, so disagreements over who's in charge. So a lot of all those conflicts fall into one of these boxes, and it's to understand which box are you actually falling into in relation to that type of conflict, so that you can get a solution to it. But there is positive and negative outcomes of conflict, and I stress this from the start. And I'm going to start purposely with the positives, because conflict is seen such as a negative word. So from a positive outcome, increased motivation and creativity. So new ideas as people look for new approaches. So I'm sure there's people on this webinar tonight that have been in rooms where I think this, you kept going until you came up with an agreement or a middle ground. But actually, a lot of the times that middle ground ended up being better than what either the individual ones were, because there was a shared thoughts and everything else. But because it was actually trashed out, you come up with a really good product at the end of it. So then people were motivated to go and do it. So that increased motivation and creativity. Also with conflict, if you have to get to the nitty gritty of conflict, it means you have to get to exactly where it started, which means you will get complete clarification of what was from it. So if somebody was chairing a meeting between myself and Paula, and I'm saying X, Y, or Z, and Paula's saying X, Y, or Z, that chairperson needs to know, okay, well, I need to understand why you think this. I need to understand why you think that. Okay, so what have we come up with this? So there's complete clarification, which may not have been there if that conflict didn't happen. It encourages team performance and cohesion. You might say, well, how does conflict do that? But after you've got conflict over you, you find teams then flourish. So they come together thereafter if the conflict was managed properly, if it wasn't let go out of control. If it was, yeah, we took this part, we took this part, and now we're going to go together in relation to it. It develops tolerance. So people get to a certain line of the conflict, but thereafter, maybe a lesser extent of that doesn't become a big thing, which it would have been done before. It would have got blown out of proportion because there was a tolerance now to the certain level of conflict you got to. It can increase trust within the relationships, because do you know what, if we did trash something out, and I'm sure Paul will say, even for ourselves when we come up with stuff, we trash out plenty of stuff and people have different thoughts and opinions, but then at the end of it, we know it has stayed within that room and that we've come up with the best product, and now we're actually trusting each other more in how we done it because we come up with it together. It assists with evaluation the existing systems and processes, because if there's some little things that are causing this conflict altogether, if every time you go to the county board meeting it's the same thing that's coming up all the time, well then the process and the system's not there to deal with it, because the same thing keeps coming up and keeps coming up. So you should be able to put something in place to stop it keep coming up. So therefore your systems and your processes get better. And in turn, that increases productivity and the sense of achievement. So we're not listening to the same thing anymore over and over again at the next executive meeting or the next county board meeting. So we feel we've achieved something, we've actually got rid of it. But on the other side, there can be negative outcomes if it's not managed properly. And some of the negative outcomes, people can feel defeated or demoralized, anxious, stressed, or adequate. You'll find they won't want to be at your meetings, or they won't want to input into anything because they actually feel, what's the point? Because it wasn't dealt with. It was completely sided the other side, or I was completely shot down. So they just don't feel part of it. That distrustful, so the opposite of what can happen. There's a suspicious environment that every time I'm going to say something, I'm not really sure if I trust everyone that's in this meeting room. So we all agreed to keep it within the room, but actually I heard afterwards it didn't. So that distrust was there. So the conflict becomes really negative on the group. Communication can be disrupted, leading to a lack of cooperation and information not being conveyed. There can be poor work and team relationships if it's allowed, especially if it's allowed fester. So you need to meet this head on, and Paul is going to discuss this in a second about meeting it head on. And then if all that's happening, of course, there's going to be a decline in productivity. Or, do you know what, I can't even be bothered going into this meeting because it's going to be the same thing. So then at that meeting, nothing gets done. And the same discussion gets dragged from meeting to meeting to meeting. So you have to meet it head on. But the biggest thing is getting that positive, or getting the system and process in place that can turn some of that conflict into positive outcomes can really help it. So don't always think of conflict as being negative. Look at when it does happen. Okay, what's the stuff we've learned out of this that we can bring forward and make those parts positive? So look for the positive and the negative in relation to it. So Paul is going to take you through, I suppose, dealing with it and a few steps to be able to deal with conflict and issues. So Paul, I'm going to hand over to you, but I know I have to click for you. So
Perfect, Lynn. And I think, like, some of the points even that you mentioned there, Lynn, even before we get into this, like, and as you said, like, if there's certain things, and when you're debating stuff, and as you say, even us, like, internally in the staff and thing, and like sometimes as well, if you see conflict, but you're like, God, okay, well, Lynn's really passionate about this, you know, she's really, you know, getting bothered about this. It makes you delve further into it and like, where is this coming from? Or Lynn, like, explain that further to me. And so I think as well, as we've said, it is about the understanding from where the other person is coming from. And when you do see somebody so passionate about something, what's the root cause of that? Because maybe if you can determine what the root cause of it is, that can help you resolve the issue. And that's exactly what I suppose our tips for dealing with conflict is what's the problem, but what's the real problem? And I think very often that's like somebody tells you and they're moaning, they're giving out about somebody, and it's like, okay, and then you find out, well, that person actually got the coaching job or the management team job and this person didn't. And that's the real issue. It's not that they actually have been verbally abused by anybody, really. It's more they've had words over how a process was done. So it's what's the problem and what has actually happened. And if anyone ever rings me when they'd be talking to me on something like that, it's the first thing is, okay, start at the start. How far back are we going? What was and was that the first incident? I'm like, oh no, well actually there was something 3 months ago. Okay, well explain that. Because again, as well, sometimes I find with conflict, they've built up over time. It hasn't just happened over one particular issue. You find there's normally history. What are the feelings associated with the conflict? And Lynn's covered a lot, even in the types of personality and all of that. What has someone got hurt? Is someone angry? Is someone jealous? What is, and that goes back to what's the real problem? And then what's the impact of the conflict? What has been the falling out? Where's the knock-on effect? Has someone left the club? Is somebody not playing? So sometimes there's immediate things that nearly needs attention. Okay, well, we need to get that team back playing, or we need to get that player back playing, and then we can sort the issues as well. So it allows you to see maybe a structure as to what parts of the conflict need to be addressed first. What would the parties like to happen? Very often I would ask somebody that is, well, what's your outcome? What do you want from this? And sometimes it'll be, well, they want someone's head in a plate. And then it's also maybe, I suppose, setting that expectation of this. Well, that's not going to happen. You can pursue this all you want, but at the end of the day, it won't be that. That's not going to be the desired outcome, and I can't make that happen for you. So it brings people back to what can a common ground be identified from the people? Can we actually agree, right, this is the middle ground, this is what we're agreeing to move on from? And again, in a lot of situations that I know comes to me, sometimes we do have to draw a line in the sand and everyone has to go, okay, fine, we're going to have to agree to disagree on this. But however, going forward, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to address it at the executive level or at the club level or a county level. And it makes people put maybe a process or a procedure in place that everyone agrees and signs up to. And sometimes we have to learn from our mistakes that process or procedure was not in place prior to that. And then, as I said, it's what can actually be done. And is it down the informal route or down the formal route? And very often, sometimes I would say, if you can deal with these levels of conflict away from the rule book, very good. We're all adults. Let's sit around, get the communication, as Lynn said, identify the type of personality of the person you're dealing with. How can we actually approach that? Or there is the formal and the code of rules, and we'll be talking a little bit about the code of rules as well, and there's a number of webinars going on about that. But the code of rules, I suppose, are there to deal with the more formal levels of conflict that we have in place. So it's having the conversation, and very often when you know someone has rang you and you know you have to ring them back, or you know you have to make that difficult phone call, prep yourself. Be prepared before you make that phone call, because, and again, going back to the colors, who are you ringing? How do you know to communicate? What do you know is really going to annoy them? What approach and tone do you need to take with this person? And very often I would say to have some key questions, okay, and try to be understanding, and try to stick to facts when they're saying, oh, she said, he said. Well, what did you actually see? What did you actually hear? Okay, and that's what you can work on. Manage your emotions and theirs. And I know even I had a phone call last Friday, and I would probably have to hold my hand up and say I didn't manage my emotions as well as what I probably should have when I was dealing with somebody, because of I reacted to them instead of going, no, hang on, don't react to them. Stick to my structure that I had for how I wanted the conversation to go, but I fell into the trap of reacting to them. And it says there, know your audience. I actually had never spoken to this person before. So in some way, maybe that's what threw me. So where possible, if you can know your audience, and maybe, for example, if I was making that same phone call again, I do know someone who did know this person. So maybe I should have made a phone call in advance to say, I need to have a conversation. What type of person are they? So can you do additional prep work? Actively listen. So, you know, and over if it's on the phone, to reconfirm maybe what they've said. Look, I'm picking up from you that you're annoyed, you're frustrated. I'm picking up that this all started back a week ago when somebody said whoever to you. So that's how you can actively listen over the phone. Obviously it's in person, you're nodding, you're smiling, that you can be actively listening that way. And then be heard. What is going to happen? I suppose don't set any false expectations. Don't say, I'll resolve all this in the morning for you. Don't worry about it. It'll all be grand. Don't make those things. Say, right, my starting point is I need to go and have a conversation now with somebody else. Or actually, maybe you're advising the person, you need to go down the formal route. This has gone so far that an informal approach is not going to help here. So decide what the action, and sometimes you can decide at this even before you pick up that phone, what is the action going to be, what should the outcome be by the end of it, and try to stick to that. Now that might deflect, and also you may be saying to the person, I need to come back to you on that, and I suppose you don't want it to be like the cartoon there on the right hand side where everything is all over the place. Somebody needs to pull it in. Everyone needs to have their rant. Everyone needs to, I suppose, blow off that steam, but it's bringing it back. And where are you going from there?
Cartoon looks a bit of crack though, Paul, I have to say.
It does. It looks like our planning meetings, Lynn, really, doesn't it? In fairness, it's the cartoon of it. So some key points to remember is to be a model of calm and control. Don't give in to emotional outbursts. Don't assume people are being difficult intentionally, And again, as I said, and that point that I made, that if someone's been really keeps going on about the same point and they're being really passionate about it, what's at the back of that? Find a quiet place to resolve conflicts privately where possible. Again, there is nothing worse than airing your dirty laundry in public. Can this be brought aside? And also, even as a chairperson at the top of a full county board meeting, and if something has been ongoing now for a number of minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and it's not been resolved, stamp it out, say this discussion is over. We have listened to points from all sides, and obviously more work needs to be done on this area. But that's the end of the debate discussion for tonight. And it's important to be able to do that. And even if it's at the executive level as well, if something's going around, and like we've already talked about, interpretation of rule, and that there's so much of a debate and discussion going on about it, chairperson stops and goes, okay, we will get clarification. We will seek that clarification and come back to you on that, because we have 3 or 4 different interpretations around the table tonight. So the chairperson is the person who will have to manage that conflict within the bigger group or within a bigger meeting. Set ground rules for discussion, and this is really important, and I think every executive should have their ground rules, and at a county board meeting there should be ground rules that no one's speaking over someone, nobody is raising their voices, and when someone raises their voices, that they will automatically be asked to not raise their voice and to calm down, but that we cannot have a discussion with them, or that them raising their voice is making everyone else really uncomfortable. And that's not how we conduct our business, be it at the executive or be it on the floor. Confront the issues, not the people. And that is a massive thing of resolving conflict. Take the person out of it, okay? And that's where we're saying about what is the real problem, what has actually happened, and try to remove the person from it. Go back to what the process was, what the procedure was, where did that process, procedure, or where did the communication break down? Okay, and I think somebody had said that about people going off doing things without proper consultation. Where did they just automatically decide? Was there a conversation between somebody else? And was there an email not sent to update everybody else that should have been sent? And again, maybe rather than attacking the person who went off and did maybe what they had agreed to do, that it's coming back and going, okay, well, Paula, we see that you approach maybe whatever sponsor. It's really interesting, but as the rest of the executive, we weren't aware of that. And, you know, when was that decided? Very different to going, Paula, what the hell were you doing? Got off approaching that sponsor. Like, oh my God, we look like idiots. So even the tone of your voice and how you approach somebody, but you can still ask. And if anyone was on the last webinar myself and William did, it was all about asking questions, asking the right questions and being able to ask questions. So a bit like that, well, Paula, you approach that sponsor. Was that agreed? Did we discuss that? Do we feel that's the right sponsorship? How did you get on with the sponsorship? So all of those issues rather than maybe attacking the person. Don't know, Lynn, if you have anything to come in on any of those before we...
No, I think that was the key point you said. A lot of the conflict, as we said at the start, comes back to people, but it's the issues they have. It's not the person. So it's getting it back to that. Yeah, no, that was a good point.
Okay. So we're just going to look at maybe some examples and using the steps, the model that we had there, and maybe some things that I suppose maybe we would see common or that would has come across us or spoken about to us. So you can see there, the Secretary of the County Board approached the County Chairperson, unhappy that communication has been sent out to clubs via another executive member. Okay, so looking at this, what is the problem, right? What's happened? Some other executive member has done the job and the role description of what the secretary was, and the secretary is clearly unhappy about it. And that, I suppose, the conversation then with the chairperson is, well, I suppose, why did that happen? And did somebody else ask them to send it? Was it a case that somebody felt the secretary was on top of their head and they didn't have time to send it? Was it something to do with registration and the registrar sent it out? So what exactly has happened, and can you look at the feelings? Obviously the secretary is annoyed about it, and the impact of that, well, secretary can be going, well, sure, the other executive member, do they want my job? Do they want to do all the secretary job? Or is there, has the information that been sent out, is it correct? Is there been is the impact that misinformation has gone out to clubs, or now clubs are responding to a different executive member about something that maybe the secretary should be corresponding on. Okay, so you can see how even one small thing can have major impact or can have a lot of knock-on effects. I suppose what would the parties like to happen? I suppose the secretary would like the chairperson to address it with the other executive member about sending out the information and agreeing the process that any correspondence or communication with clubs is sent via the county secretary. That's the process, regardless of what it is. And very often even you'd see that from a national level, that if it's information to do with the injury fund, registration, maybe even a new development program, GDPR, and maybe something to do with code of behaviour, it will all go out through the info account to clubs or county boards, because that's our main source of where it is. It may be followed up with an email from Lynn if it's development, or me from GDPR, but you can guarantee is our main source, because that's our process. That's what's agreed. That's our procedure. So can the common ground be identified? I suppose maybe the executive member, was it they reacted to something they got instead of maybe coming back to the secretary? And then what can actually be done is agree in the process. Is it informal or formal? It's informal. Really, it shouldn't develop into something formal, but the chairperson should be addressing it straight away with the other executive member, and even with the secretary, because you don't want tension between the secretary and that executive member, which is what could have built up because the secretary went straight to the chairperson annoyed about it. I don't know, you want to add anything on that?
No, I was going to say, and in that case, like Paul, even when you look at those examples and we talked about the positives and the negatives that can come from stuff, and you can clearly see some of the negatives that could potentially be lingering on, but also from a positive perspective, as you said, maybe the secretary was under pressure and didn't realise that the other executive member was trying to do it to help out. So that could be a positive that comes from it. On the other hand, if that does, well then now the county executive is sitting and putting in proper writing on their guidelines of how they operate as an executive in relation to communication. So that's a positive that should come out of it, that we now have clear guidelines as to what should happen, and everyone's very clear about how it should happen. So that's not necessarily a negative. That's something we all learned. It won't happen again, and now we have a clear process to do it. So I'm going to take the positives from some of this conflict as well, but that's one of them, Paula.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really the key person in this one is the chairperson, and how they react to it and how they deal with it, and that they follow these steps in it. Whereas if the chairperson tells worry about it, it's fine, it's one email, that's when then the tension between the secretary and the member, tension between the secretary and the chairperson. So it's really about bringing it back in, haven't we? Executive have had to make the difficult decision of cancelling a competition, but one club is against the decision and has taken over your council. They're dominating at the county board, and this is probably something we all had to do across the board, and it upset a number of people. And so I suppose this is one, is what is the problem? Why this is the exact, what exactly is the club's so annoyed at this decision? Like, what is the root cause? Is it because maybe they were leading in the league and the league competition was over? Oh, somebody's saying I'm breaking up at times.
Yeah, it's just breaking
in
and out. Yeah, I thought it might have been my side, Paula, but it just broke up a little bit there.
Okay. I'll start that one. So really going this one here, you're looking at what is the problem. So what is the club's main issue with the competition? Is it because they're leading the league and they're at the top of the league, and maybe they haven't been in a number of years, and now the whole competition's being, is that their frustration? So this is something, again, it's obviously dominating the county board meeting. This is exactly one where the chairperson would be coming in and saying is made, it's completely in our hands due to COVID-19, and I will speak to maybe chairperson of your club after this meeting to liaise with them on it, because there has to be more. Like, what are the feelings associated? is this about club coach? Is it there and them wanting to win something? Or is this about players in that maybe there's a team of players there and after this competition, a number of them were going to retire? What is the impact of the conflict there? How are the club picking it up wrong? How are the club communicating it? And I suppose in this case, maybe what would the parties like to happen? Obviously the club want the competition to happen. That's not possible. Can a common ground be identified? Is there time to play the competition when the calendar resumes? What are the benefits of doing that? Can that be discussed about? Where can we play this, or can we come back to the next county board maybe with a proposal of where we may be able to fit it in if we are allowed back up and playing whenever it can be done? Again, what can actually be done? Is it informal or formal? This is another informal one, because even the club, they can't go down a formal route. They can't appeal your decision because COVID-19 is something we were all faced with that is really unpredictable, not something that we could predict when we were going to get back onto the field of play. So it's not really one that a club could appeal against it. So it is an informal. It's really about asking that club as well to respect the decision that the county board has had to make in these difficult circumstances. Nobody wants to cancel it. So it's really about explaining it, but also it is about telling the club decision is made and the decision is final and we have to stand over it and we have other business now to proceed with. So I don't know, Lynn, if you have anything else on that one?
No, it's just more like, as Paula said, they're just kind of things, but I'm sure you could replace that decision with 40 other decisions that's going around your head at the minute that could be at a county board meeting. But what we're trying to do is not come up with the solutions to each of these problems. It's to really drill in those steps that Paula has gone through there, so that you can use those steps and apply them to anything. And I think Paula used them really well to show those two examples. So the steps are the key, I think, in relation to this one, Paula.
Absolutely. And as we said, maybe not all parts of each step will fit with each one, but it is also going through each of them and maybe not stepping one, or not skipping one, but maybe saying actually it doesn't particularly apply in this when you've looked at it. Okay. So then looking at the code of rules, and I suppose going down the formal way of it, like it's complaints. And really prior to the code of rules, we had no procedure or process for dealing with a complaint. Whereas now within the code of rules, it's very clearly defined, and that a complaint is of a personal nature made by one member against another member or a unit. And I suppose probably one of the things as code officers that we find is people say, well, I want to complain about the referee. That's not a complaint. That's a club having issues with how a referee officiated a game. So they should send, that's correspondence, and they should send that correspondence to the fixtures committee. A complaint is really, and I know I dealt with a person today, and it was really an issue that the person had with another executive member in their club. And it had been ongoing, and everyone in the club were like, oh, it was excused because, well, you know, and this is not his name, but you know, Johnny, that's just how Johnny is. That's how he reacts to everything. So when this coach actually did send in a complaint and say, no, actually, I'm really annoyed by this. Johnny verbally abused me. They're like, no, sure, it's just Johnny. That's how he is. Don't worry about it. No, sure, he wouldn't mean that. Sure, tomorrow he'll be off shouting at someone else. That wasn't good. That's not good enough. Johnny was actually a member of the executive, and it was witnessed to him actually shouting at this coach. But the club haven't dealt with it really, and definitely haven't dealt with it under the procedures. But the code of rules is there now to allow a club to deal with that, to deal with Johnny informally through the informal dispute resolution, which is the first step when you do get a complaint. And that is the whole thing of, we're adults. Can we sit around the table? Can we discuss where this communication is broken down? And Johnny, who's going around verbally abusing people, thinking this is okay and this is fine because his behaviour has been let go for the club for numerous years, has actually now upset and annoyed somebody. And it's important to point that out and to make him realise that. But that's where the informal dispute resolution is. Do you realise your actions, your behaviour has actually upset another person and has actually made that person submit a complaint about you? naturally the person on the other side of that informal dispute resolution will probably be defensive, will probably be like, no, 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 not a chance. But it's about the person then making the complaint to actually demonstrate some of their examples. Well, in this case, this is what happened and this is how I felt. So it's really breaking it down. But for code officers, we have an informal dispute procedure. And actually, that could be used by any of you on any form of conflict. It doesn't necessarily have to get to a code of rules complaints. You actually read the informal dispute resolution would actually help you with any form of dispute or conflict that you come across too. Gives you some very key questions that you can ask to help you actually get to the root bottom of what you are looking at. If the informal dispute resolution doesn't work, there is mediation, and that mediation is carried out then by an external body. And like all mediation, the content of that mediation is private and confidential. What we do get though is a mediation report to say that both parties cooperated, however, they were falling down on one particular area that couldn't get them over the line. It wouldn't say what that area is, but it would say there are maybe 5 sources of conflict, or there's 2 sources, or one main source of conflict. And then after that mediation, then it would go to a hearing. And again, that hearing, and I think that's where a lot of people, when they submit a complaint, they think they're going to get someone's head on a plate. The hearing might come out with a recommendation in that we need to draw a line in the sand here. We can see there are a lot of people hurt. There's a lot of people upset over this. There's been a lot of fallout from this complaint. However, we can't point the finger at any one person. Nobody is can be held accountable for the full impact of this. However, we will put in a new method of maybe appointing the managers within our club or within our setup, and this is how we're going to do it going forward so that this fallout will not happen again. So the recommendation could be a process that has to be put in place. That's all on that one. Okay, over to you, Lynn.
Yes, I know we've thrown a lot at you there for the last few minutes, but it's very much around trying to get you to see that conflict, kind of positives, kind of negatives, but really it's how it's managed, I think, is the key in relation to all of this. So we're just going to show you this quick little video, and then we're going to wrap up for you. So we'll show you this, and it kind of wraps a lot of what we're after talking about into one.
Okay, so if you put a bunch of people together and ask them to achieve something, the chances are there will be a disagreement or two. Conflict is a natural part of working in teams, and it can occur for a number of reasons. For example, it could be a conflict caused by processes, overlapping roles, or differences in opinion. Sometimes conflicts can be caused by external influences, but of course the classic reason is interpersonal conflict. Now, when a conflict occurs, there are steps you can take to solve it constructively. The correct way would be to take a step back and ask yourself some challenging questions. Start by asking yourself, why is there a conflict in the first place? Simply by thinking about the cause of the conflict could be enough to give you the solution. It may help to write it down or discuss it with someone, but if that doesn't shed any light, then try seeing it from the other person's point of view. Best-selling author Stephen Covey uses the phrase, seek first to understand, then to be understood. By this he means if you understand the other person's point of view, then you can get your point across much easier. Finally, try to remember what's really important. What are your priorities? Is your point of view in line with the overall objectives of the team, and are you being true to your principles? Try to keep emotions out of it and keep conversations professional, but most importantly, be focused on a solution. Don't dwell on the conflict or hold grudges. Be focused on finding a win-win outcome. Although conflict can be damaging to a team's productivity, it's worth considering the upsides of conflict. Yes, conflict can have its benefits. Think about it. If ideas aren't challenged and different views aren't aired, then how do good ideas ever become great ideas? The Honda Corporation are actually known to encourage conflict in its design teams because they recognise that out of the chaos can come great creativity. So the right amount of conflict can be good, but generally teams working in harmony perform better. So to be an effective member of a team, you need to be mindful of why conflict occurs and the questions you can ask yourself in order to find a resolution.
Okay, so I think that little video just wrapped up a lot of what we were talking
You
about.
always can find them, Lynn.
But yeah, it wraps up a lot of it, and I suppose the reason we wrapped up the evening with it is conflict can be such a negative word, as we talked about at the start. And yes, I don't think any of us like to be in conflict situations. We're not at all saying that, but it is important that we look at some of the positives that could potentially come from it too, and that maybe we improve our processes, we improve things. So those nights when you're sitting as an executive, normally around a table, but currently looking at a screen, bashing each other, that think of, okay, well, actually what we come up with at the end of this, was it actually better because we actually trashed it out? So it's just to get those little bits of conflict and the positives that can come with it. So before we go to the last slide, Paul, I don't know if you have anything on that video either that kind of wraps up your points.
No, yeah, I think I agree, Gillian. I think it is a matter of, and sometimes, you know, even if you do have a discussion or a piece of conflict with somebody, you do go, God, you end up reflecting on it and coming back going, okay, yeah, maybe, or, you know, maybe I need to change my way, or I never thought of it like that. And to be the bigger person to come back to the table the next night going, look, I know, Lynn, I was really like hard on whatever the last time, but actually I can see it now from your point of view, or I can see why it will be beneficial to us. So as Lynn said, it can be a positive thing in how people reflect and how they deal with it. So it's not always negative. You do want a level of debate and discussion around your table. I suppose it's that line of when it goes into conflict and when it is heated debate, I suppose.
And hopefully all the webinars we've done to date are trying to be putting structures in place to prevent it coming to the period of conflict. So hopefully if you've learned from all the previous webinars and getting you all to work together as an executive, those, I suppose, times of conflict shouldn't come up as much if all those structures are put in place. So from tonight then, I suppose all we want to ask you to do, we're going to make you do your final bit of work. Just maybe in the chat, if there's one thing you take from the session, if you want to type it there in the chat, and then we'll just open it in case anyone has any questions. But we'll keep an eye on it and coming into the chat there to see.
Yeah, and absolutely, as Lynn says, if there's any questions either, consider where the conflict is coming from. Yeah, and I think that's key. If you can find out where that's coming from and the reasons why someone is saying stuff that they're saying, it really helps. Other things, Lynn, is always be open-minded, consider other people's personality traits, lots more patience needed, absolutely. Series of questions to ask myself when responding to conflict, very helpful. Seek first to understand, show a willingness to compromise. Conflict can be productive depending on how you approach it. And then a thank you to myself and yourself. So I think that the willingness to compromise as well, because as you say, Lynn, you might be hell-bent and gone in with something, somebody raises something from the floor and it's like, oh, actually, that would actually really enhance what we're trying to do, but it might be a little bit in conflict of what you wanted originally, like, but it's still, as you say, a better outcome.
Perfect. So I don't know if
life would be boring if we all thought the same.
Exactly, and hopefully if one thing showed you tonight was your colours, that if we were all the same, we'd all be a blue or we'd all be a green or all a red. So the importance of that mixture of colours is, and when we done it as a staff, Paula, like there was so many different colours, and it actually showed, well, maybe that's why at times there's conflict, but at times then we all really come up with something because there's so many ideas coming into it.
And as you said, like, and I think you've said it, Lynn, about the conflict, that it's not personal, that we know we can go in, we can have maybe an argument over a program, a process, whatever it is, but when we walk out, we can still go, who's making the tea? Because it's about that, what happened around the table. It's not personal, but we agree whatever it is to compromise walking out of there. So, you know, it's about what you're discussing. It isn't personal if people can leave the person out of it.
I'll remember that on Friday morning, Paula. For everyone, we do our meetings on a Friday morning, and Paula gets lovely scones that she passes my house by to get and doesn't leave in. She's talking about bringing this tea to everyone on a Friday morning, so I'll remember that one. I don't know if anyone has any other questions there, or If not, we'll let you loose for the night.
Yeah, no, I think, Lynn, people are saying if people take on board those points that they've noted there now, I think absolutely it should be, there'll be no issues around the whole country, Lynn, put it that way.
we had the first phone call. No, thanks a million, everyone. And as always, I know we're at home and there's no activity on the pitches, but that doesn't mean you don't have a busy life. So we do really appreciate the time that you're putting into coming to these, and it's just great to be able to engage with people and try and help in some way. And all the topics that we're coming up with have come directly from you that you've said would help. So as much as we were crying when we had to put out a whole spring series of webinars because we were all sitting at home, we do feel that they'll benefit. So keep an eye on some of the ones that's coming up. We have some cracking ones coming for county leadership again in relation to, as Paula mentioned, there's ones for GDPR, for CODA, for sponsorship, for streaming of games. We've a brilliant one coming up with Shane Martin in May that I can't recommend highly enough for people to come. We're taking in an outside speaker, but Shane's really going to look after you as a volunteer and how you look after yourself. So some brilliant stuff coming up. So you won't just be listening to us. I'll be fed up to myself and Paula. There'll be plenty of different voices. So thanks everyone. Stay safe. And Paula, I don't know if you want to say anything before you wrap it up.
No, I agree. I'm looking forward to Shane Martin's as well, Lynn, where we can actually be listening rather than being on this side of the screen. So yeah, definitely one not to be missed. I think, we give the date of that? 10th of May, isn't it?
The 10th of May.
I know you've issues with that date, Lynn, putting it in your head, but I think it is the 10th of May, but definitely one for everyone.
It is a Monday. In my head, it's a Saturday.